Got a question? Here's the way. Ask the expert here today. Learning starts with today's show. Let's hear what the tech experts know.
Hi, I am your technical advisor today, and I'd like to talk about something that affects every neighborhood in Sacramento: environmental contamination. Environmental contamination affects all of us and is potentially present in many places within our own communities. But don't worry, environmental contamination is not something to be alarmed about. Instead, it should be something that we should be more informed on. Having solid, foundational knowledge about environmental contamination will better equip you and your family to meaningfully participate in discussions about your neighborhood and make informed decisions in your local area. In this video, we will discuss what contamination is, where it comes from, how it moves through the environment, and why contamination happens in our neighborhoods. This video was made possible by the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC. DTSC defines its mission as protecting California's people and environment from the harmful effects of toxic substances. When contamination is discovered at a site, DTSC is often the agency responsible for overseeing cleanup and keeping the public informed. Environmental contamination happens when harmful substances, chemicals, metals, or other pollutants end up in places where they don't belong: in our soil, our water, the air we breathe, or the dust in our homes. Contamination is essentially an unwanted presence of harmful material in the environment. It can be obvious, like a chemical spill you can see and smell, or it can be completely invisible, sitting in groundwater or soil for decades before anyone realizes it's there. Let's talk about the most common types of contaminants found at industrial and urban sites, including right here in the Sacramento region. Lead is the most well-known. It was used for generations in paint, plumbing, and gasoline before we understood how toxic it truly is. In Sacramento's older residential and industrial neighborhoods, lead can still be found in soils near former roadways, older buildings, and sites with a history of manufacturing. Children are especially vulnerable. Even low levels of lead exposure can affect brain development. Arsenic is a naturally occurring metal, but industrial activity and past pesticide use have elevated it well beyond safe levels in many areas. Sacramento's water supply has faced scrutiny over arsenic levels, particularly in areas that draw on groundwater. Prolonged exposure is linked to serious health risks, including certain cancers. VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, are a family of chemicals used heavily in industrial processes: cleaning solvents, degreasers, dry cleaning fluids. The word volatile means they evaporate easily, which makes them harder to detect. VOCs can even move from the soil or groundwater into the air and in through cracks and gaps in buildings in a process called vapor intrusion. You may not see it, smell it, or feel it happening, but it can be occurring. PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, were used in electrical equipment and industrial applications for decades before being banned in the late 1970s. They break down very slowly in the environment, which means PCBs deposited 40 or 50 years ago can still be present in soils and sediments today. They are persistent, bioaccumulative, meaning they build up in living tissue, and are classified as probable human carcinogens. Pesticides are well known in California, as the state has had a long agricultural history, and the Sacramento region is no exception. Pesticide residues from farming, orchards, and even suburban lawn care can linger in soil and find their way into groundwater. Some older pesticides that are now banned, like DDT, are still detectable in Sacramento area soils and sediments. Now let's talk about how these contaminants move through the environment, because contamination rarely stays put. The environment is interconnected. What gets into the soil doesn't just sit there. Soil is often the first place contamination lands. From a spill, waste buried on a site, or chemicals applied to the ground over time. Once in soil, contaminants can be picked up as dust, tracked into homes on shoes, and ingested or inhaled, especially by young children who play on the ground. Groundwater is rain or irrigation water in the soil surface and below. When rain or irrigation water moves through contaminated soil, it can carry those chemicals downward until they reach the underground water table. This is how a contaminated industrial site can affect drinking water wells in a neighborhood, sometimes miles away from the original source. Air is the third major pathway, and this is where vapor intrusion comes back into play. VOCs in contaminated groundwater or soil can vaporize and migrate upward. Right through the foundation of a building, for example, dust connects all of these. In dry climates like Sacramento's, fine soil particles that contain heavy metals like lead or arsenic can become airborne. People inhale them, children touch contaminated surfaces, it enters homes through open windows. Sacramento has a rich and complex history. And like many cities, some of that history left an environmental footprint that communities are still living with today. For example, across Sacramento's older neighborhoods, former industrial sites, dry cleaners, gas stations, and commercial operations have left contamination behind. Auto repair shops used solvents that are now classified as hazardous. Many of these properties have since been redeveloped, sometimes with cleanup, sometimes without adequate oversight. The Sacramento Valley's agricultural legacy also plays a role. Decades of pesticide applications, some of which involved chemicals now banned, have left residues in soils throughout the region, particularly in communities that border farmland or were converted from agricultural use. Here's one local example to help further demonstrate the causes of contamination. One of these former industrial sites is on Thornton Avenue, north of downtown, where an old electrical generation and distribution site known as a substation ran from the 1930s until 1989. The site sits in a neighborhood with a long industrial history. Repair shops, truck yards, welding operations, and refrigeration businesses. When environmental testing was eventually conducted, scientists found arsenic levels far exceeding safe limits. Thanks to this testing, DTSC is working actively with local organizations to clean up the site for future use. A common question community members ask is, how does contamination stay with us for so long without anybody doing anything about it? First, contamination is often invisible. You can't see lead in the soil or smell TCE in your tap water at low levels. You can't detect arsenic in groundwater without laboratory testing. This invisibility means contamination can persist for years without residents knowing it's there. Second, testing takes resources. Identifying contamination requires scientific investigation. Soil sampling, groundwater monitoring wells, air testing. This work is expensive and time-consuming, and historically, resources for investigation have not always been directed toward lower income or communities of color. This is a recognized environmental justice issue that DTSC and Cal EPA have increasingly acknowledged and committed to addressing. Third, data wasn't always public. Even when contamination was known to regulators, communities weren't always informed in ways that were accessible or timely. DTSC's EnviroStore database provides public access to information about contaminated sites, cleanup status, and related documents. But this kind of transparency took time to develop. Fourth, legal and institutional processes move slowly. From the moment contamination is discovered to the time a cleanup is approved, many years and even decades can pass. And finally, contamination migrates. A contaminant buried on an industrial site in the 1960s may not be detected until it has traveled several miles through groundwater to a new location, where residents have no reason to expect there's a problem at all. Environmental awareness is not just for scientists or lawyers, it's for all of us. Understanding what contamination is, where it comes from, and how it moves is the foundation for being an informed participant in decisions that affect your health, your family, and your neighborhood. DTSC's mission, protecting California's people from harmful, toxic substances, is a mission that depends on engaged communities. Their EnviroStore database is a powerful tool you can use right now to look up contaminated sites near your home, your child's school, or anywhere in Sacramento. Visit chastengold.org to learn more. Thank you for watching, and always make sure to ask an expert.
Got a question? Here's the way. Ask the expert here today. Learning starts with today's show. Let's hear what the tech experts know.